Have you seen confession tapes on Netflix? It's a program featuring about 6-7 stories where people have confessed to a crime they didn't actually commit. Now, if you have watched that program, you're really gonna find this case interesting. We have a 73-year-old man with no formal education who also might have confessed to a crime he didn't commit. As you already know, my name is Anton Vieltsin. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in San Diego. The case is People versus Torres. Mr. Torres is a 73-year-old man with no formal education, and he might have confessed to a crime he didn't actually commit. In this case, a lot of these cases, it's often difficult to draw the line between good police work and excessive pressure in getting a false confession. So let me give you the facts. We have a 73-year-old man living with a family of 3. At some point, the mother is giving bath to her daughter. By the way, the daughter is only 4 years old. And the daughter says that this man has inappropriately touched her. When the mother asks more questions, it turns out that the daughter basically says that this man has been touching her on the vagina for the last some period of time. So of course the mother is very concerned. She takes the daughter to this police station here and makes a report. The police interviews the daughter, and the daughter essentially says the same story. They take the daughter to a physical examiner and they find no evidence connecting Mr. Torres to this daughter. They don't find any DNA, they don't find anything. The agents decide to interrogate Mr. Torres. They arrive to his new house in an unmarked vehicle. They invite him out, they tell him to sit in the car. He sits exactly where I sit. We have one officer in the driver's seat here. We have one officer in the back. I've seen this done before. Essentially, one of them speaks Spanish, one of them speaks English. The whole interrogation is in Spanish, but the agent in the back translates for the agent in the front, and the agent in the front takes notes. They do tell Mr. Torres that they're not there to arrest him that day, and that they just want to figure out the truth. They want to figure out if the girl is lying or if he's lying. Now, as I said, there's 2 agents and Mr. Torres here in the front. The agents are also wearing plain clothes and there's no weapons visible. However, the engine is running and the doors are closed. The reason why they did that, they say, is because the air conditioning needs to be run, and it was, I guess, really hot that day, kind of like it is today. We have agents tell Mr. Torres that they found DNA on the girl and the DNA belongs to him. Mr. Torres, of course, denies that and says that's not true. However, maybe there is some DNA on the clothing, because after all, they lived together in the same house and he played with the girl, and so maybe there's some DNA of his on her. They do tell him that the DNA is on the body and not on the clothing. He again denies, and after that they tell him that they did give a lie detecting test to the girl, and they found out that everything she said is apparently true. By the way, that's not what happened. They did not give any lie detector to the girl, so they're just simply lying to Mr. Torres. Eventually they tell him, like I said, they're not there to arrest him. They keep pressuring him, they keep telling him and minimizing his conduct, essentially saying that after all, he didn't have sex with her, he didn't show his penis to her, and that all there was is some touching. And so they try to minimize that, and they say that really there's nothing for him to worry about. If he tells them the truth, that's all they need. And eventually he buckles. He doesn't say that he exactly touched the girl, but he adopts the statement that the police says. Mr. Torres eventually gets convicted at trial, even though the girl testifies that she doesn't really understand the difference between truth and a lie. After all, she's only 4 years old. There's also some suggestion that perhaps the mother is the one that told the story to the daughter and the daughter is simply repeating the story. As you remember, there's no witnesses, no physical evidence tying Mr. Torres to the victim. He gets convicted solely based on that confession and that confession tape that was provided to the jury. Here's an interesting part. The jury got to listen to the very audio tape that the two agents recorded having Mr. Torres confess to the crime. Interestingly, the defense attorney in this case did not file a motion to get that audio recording thrown out of court. Also, the same defense attorney did not argue at trial and did not object to the audio recording being played. So we have Mr. Torres getting convicted solely on one audio recording. He of course appeals. Now at appellate level, he has to prove that his attorney was ineffective. How does he do that? He needs to show that a reasonable attorney in his attorney's position would have objected, that that attorney should have actually filed the motion. But not only that, he now needs to show that if that filing would have been done and that objection would have been made, that he would have been found innocent. It's a very hard threshold to meet. Now the appellate court has to analyze the motion. It's a Miranda motion. Remember, when the officers interrogated Mr. Torres, they never gave him the Miranda. Here's how Miranda works. Remember the show Cops from the 90s, early 2000s? You had people putting their hands on the car and the cops immediately reading their rights. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't get an attorney, you can't afford one will be provided to you. They read you those rights immediately. Now that's not how that works in real life. Yes, a cop can read you your rights immediately, but Miranda in real life, here's how that works. The easy way to remember Miranda is interrogation plus custody equals Miranda. If somebody's in custody and being interrogated, he needs to be given Miranda rights beforehand. Interrogation is asking questions that can elicit incriminating answers. In this situation, that's easy. Of course he's being interrogated. Mr. Torres is being asked about the situation, about what happened, if the girl's lying, if he's lying, and what exactly happened. The real question is custody. What does custody mean? Police often think that if they say that you're not in custody, you automatically not in custody. But that's not how that works. The court will look at factors to determine if you're in custody. If a reasonable person is not free to leave and feels like they're not free to leave, then they're in custody. Interrogation plus custody equals Miranda. Here are the factors that the court will look at. Who initiated the initial conversation? Did the person voluntarily come in for the interview? Is he questioned as a witness or as a suspect? Where is the interview being taken place? Is the person informed if he's under arrest or if he's in custody? Remember, this is the one that the police really likes. This is the one where the cop says, you're not in custody, so the cop thinks that you're automatically not in custody, but that's not how that works. Is the person being informed that they're free to terminate the interrogation? Is the person's freedom of movement restricted? How long is the interrogation? Does it take a couple of minutes or is it hours? How many officers are present at that interrogation? Who controls the flow of the conversation? Does the police tell the person that they believe he's guilty? Do they have evidence against him and they show that evidence, showing that here it is, we have the proof you're guilty? Are the officers being aggressive, confrontational? Do they use pressure techniques that are taught in the academy? And finally, is that person arrested at the end of the conversation? So then we have the court balancing these for this case. On one hand, the detectives were in plain clothes, They interviewed Mr. Torres for only 45 minutes. Mr. Torres was never threatened, and they arrested him only 2 weeks after the interview, so he wasn't arrested immediately. Torres was required to speak to the officers, but was free to leave. But the last factor is kind of hard. They insisted that they needed to find the truth. After all, the doors were closed, and it seemed like he wasn't going to leave and wasn't going to go anywhere unless he actually provided that truth. And in the police officer's mind and eyes, it looked like truth, meaning he has to confess to this crime. And here are the factors that go the other way. We have an unmarked vehicle controlled by the police officers. The doors are closed, the air conditioning is running, the engine is running. Then the officers begin using common techniques. They lie about the evidence that they have. They ask him leading questions, give him choices that some things are easier than others. They minimize his accusations, telling him that after all, it's not a big deal, that all they're doing is making a report for the judge, and once the judge reads the report, everything is going to be done. They falsely tell him that there's DNA found on the girl, even though there's no DNA found on the girl. They tell him about the lie detecting test that they provided to the girl, and apparently everything she said was true. That wasn't true. They never gave the lie detecting test. The girl's, after all, 4 years old. They give him incentives to confess. And studies repeatedly show us that when enough pressure is made on the person and enough false evidence is shown, sometimes people buckle, and sometimes they give false confessions to the crimes they never actually committed.
All of us could falsely confess to something.
If you gotta keep your eyes closed while you say it, say it.
It might take you a week.
Let's go right now.
It might take me an hour.
Say it.
But we're all gonna have our breaking point.
The fact that the officers here were calm and professional is also a common technique. We often see officers being very calm with a suspect in order to get them talking. Because if you seem confrontational, sometimes people want to leave and don't want to talk to the police. At the end of the day, the court deems that Miranda should have been given, and more importantly, that the defense attorney should have ran the motion. He should have ran the motion because there's a good chance he would have won. It looks like there's enough factors here that Miranda should have been given. And if Miranda would have been given, of course, that audio recording would have been thrown out of court and the jury would have never heard the confession. And without the confession, going back to what I said earlier, without that confession, the prosecution really had no evidence against the defendant, against Mr. Torres. So here are my conclusions. At the end of the day, I don't know if Mr. Torres is guilty. I don't know if he's innocent. All we know is that police should have given Miranda, and that interrogation should have been thrown out of trial because they did it. Interesting part for me though is what happens if Mr. Torres would have been given Miranda. I will tell you that a vast majority of my clients do speak to the police officers. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it's because they're afraid of the police. I'm not sure if they have respect for the law and for the law enforcement, or simply they think that if they say something funny, something unique, something tricky, they can get out of the situation. All of those factors, that might be true. And I'm not sure exactly why, but people do speak to the police. So let's say Mr. Torres is given Miranda and he chooses to speak. Are we okay with police forcing an individual to confess? And how much pressure is allowed? That's really the question for me and for all of us. If we're okay with innocent people going to prison, then I think pressure is good. That's what good police work is all about. You get the person to confess to the crime. But if we're not okay with that risk, if we're not okay with even 5%, 10% risk of innocent people going to prison, then we should really be eliminating any kind of pressure. We need to have people voluntarily confessing to the crime. Now go watch confession tapes on Netflix. If you liked this video, please click like, subscribe, and tell your friends about this channel.